I've been to Granada, Nicaragua, I don't know, 5 times, 6 times, 4 times, I lose count. It's one of my favorite places in Central America to go because it's this gorgeous Spanish colonial town that, unlike most gorgeous colonial towns, didn't get huge, and so it's still got all of its old buildings, because when cities get bigger, they tear down the small old buildings to replace with newer, larger ones, and so you have a city like Managua where the entire historical center is gone, partly due to an earthquake in 1972 or so. But whenever I'm in Granada, there are 3 or 4 churches I like to go to. One of them, however, that's my favorite, is called La Merced, the Mercy Church. And as I go down the street to La Merced, you go in, and if you pay $1, you can climb up the stairs to the bell tower. And it's a real bell tower with a real big bell in it. Our bell tower doesn't have bells in it. The neighbors, I don't think in the 1920s and 30s, wanted us to have bells in our bell tower. So this one has a bell that is bigger than this pulpit. And, whenever it's, the time to ring it, it's actually literally about a 13-year-old boy grabs onto the rope and just swings to make this thing go. It's nuts. And the thing is, they push you out to the edge, the balcony, out on the edge overlooking kind of outside of the bell tower, and hopefully it gets structurally looked at every now and then by an engineer, but it's because the sound is so massive of this thing. It's a boom, and literally every artery in your body starts vibrating. It's incredibly powerful, and every time I see it, I'm blown away. But there's a story from the 1600s, 17th century England, when Oliver Cromwell was Lord Protector of all England. He had sentenced a soldier to be executed for his crimes. They were going to kill him. But when it came time for the execution, something went wrong, because he was sentenced to die when the evening bell rang for curfew. That was his sentence. And when the time came to execute this soldier, this criminal, the bell didn't go off. And Cromwell instructed people to go figure out what's going on. Why is the execution being delayed? We're waiting on the bell. And they go up and they find that the young soldier's young fiancée had climbed up into the bell tower and wrapped herself around the big thing in the middle of the bell. And each time it clanged, instead of making sounds, it crushed her. And they brought her down, and Oliver Cromwell could see her injuries, the bruises, the bleeding, that she had been willing to sacrifice her life to save her future husband from death. And Cromwell looked at her, and he was so touched, he said, and Cromwell wasn't often touched. Yet he was touched, and he said, "Your lover shall live because of your sacrifice. Curfew shall not ring this night." See, that's what love looks like. Self-sacrificial love. We see another picture of love on the evening in which Jesus dined, the Last Supper, on the night before he was betrayed. It's in John 13. The reason we're doing this one now is this is what I was going to preach on the snow day back in February, and rather than pushing everything forward, I just said we'll take them out of sequence. This is John 13, the first 5 verses, the gospel of our Lord. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And so Jesus shows them what real love looks like. What does it mean to love another person? What does it look like to love your classmates or your coworkers, your teachers or your sister or brother, your mom, your dad, your children, your spouse? What does it look like to love your enemies, to love the people who talk about you behind your back, the people who don't care for you? What does Jesus tell us about love for other people? First, Jesus shows us that love is doing what is best for the other person. Jesus washes his disciples' feet. That's Jesus showing us what love is by doing what's best for his disciples who had come off the ground with dirty feet. Jesus is proactively serving these men, doing what's best for them, even at his own expense. You know, we often think in our culture that love is the absence of malice. The absence of malice is not love. The absence of malice is neglect. That is ignoring people. That is not love. Love is the presence of something very, very powerful. It's the presence of something positive and good and beautiful. And Jesus intends that we do what he does by doing this proactive love on purpose, even to our enemies. Later in the passage, Jesus explains that he wants, in verses 12 to 17, he says, I want you to wash one another's feet as I have washed your feet. That means adjusting our reality and our experience to fit their need, what they're requiring. A doctor named Richard Seltzer, many decades ago, describes the post-operative scene after he had removed a tumor from a young woman's cheek. He writes, I stand by the bed where a young woman lies, her face post-operative, her mouth twisted in palsy, clownish. A tiny twig of the facial nerve, the one of the muscles of her mouth has been severed, and she will be like this from now on. The surgeon had followed with religious fervor the curve of her flesh, I promise you that. Nevertheless, to remove the tumor in her cheek, I had to cut the little nerve. Her young husband is in the room. He stands on the opposite side of the bed, and together they seem to dwell in the evening lamplight, isolated from me, private. Who are they, I ask myself, he and this wry mouth I have made, who gaze at and touch each other so generously, so greedily? The young woman speaks. Will my mouth always be like this? Yes, I say, it will. It is because the nerve was cut. She nods. She's silent. But the young man smiles. I like it, he says. It's kind of cute. All at once I know who he is. I understand and therefore lower my gaze. One is not bold in an encounter with a god. Unmindful, he bends to kiss her crooked mouth, and I am so close I can see how he twists his own lips to accommodate to hers, to show her that the kiss still works. Friends, that's love. Love meets her where she is. Love twists my own experience in a God-like way, in a Christ-like way, in order to reach the person we're trying to love. Look at how Jesus is twisting to love his disciples in this passage. He's about to launch them into mission, and he wants them to know what really matters most. It's love, doing what's in the best interests of the other. Love requires that we see and hear and know the other person so that we can discern what their true needs are. Love never exists outside of relationship. It's why the Bible can say that God is love, because God has always existed from eternity, but from before creation. God had always existed as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three persons loving each other, because love happens in relationship, and relationship was eternal, and love between the members of the Trinity has been eternal. And so God himself is love. Question, how is love different from people-pleasing? It's a radically different motivation. A people pleaser is always trying to get other people to like them. And they will say what they think will get somebody to like them and do what they think will make themselves likable. But it's always self-interest, self-driven, because I need people's approval. I will use them and do what I think will manipulate them into liking me. That's a very selfish thing. It's a very ugly thing, and it will leave you absolutely in bondage. That's not love. Love is different from people-pleasing. Next question. How is love different from weakness? Love is different from weakness in its motivation. Weakness is motivated out of fear of strength. It's all about me. If I give up in weakness, that's my self-preservation instinct. It's not me thinking about what's in their best interest and doing what's best for them, because sometimes, even when you are weak, you have to stand up to somebody who is strong in the name of love. Third question, how is this different from being a doormat? Well, a doormat is always passive. A doormat has no agency. Yes, a doormat gets walked all over, and if you love people, you may get walked all over just like a doormat. But a doormat is passive, and love is active. Jesus is proactively assessing the situation and doing what his disciples need the most. Love can require confrontation, even. Love is not passive. Jesus shows us that love is doing what's best for other people. Not people-pleasing, not weakness, not being a doormat, but sacrificially doing what's in their best interests and doing it on purpose. We see something else here. We also see that love always requires sacrifice. Love is doing what's in the best interests of others, but it always requires sacrifice. Washing his disciples' feet required Jesus to sacrifice. What is a sacrifice? Sacrifice is when you give up something good, something you like, something you enjoy, something that is valuable. Giving up trash is not a sacrifice. Giving up something that's important to you, a career path, money, time, that's sacrifice. If it doesn't cost you something, it's not yet love. Love is sacrificing your priorities, sacrificing your comfort, sacrificing your interests, sacrificing your pleasure, sacrificing your security in order to bless someone else. How is Jesus sacrificing for his disciples? New Testament scholar D.A. Carson describes it this way. He says, doubtless the disciples would have been happy to wash his feet. They could not conceive of washing one another's feet, since this was a task normally reserved for the lowliest of menial servants. Peers did not wash one another's feet except very rarely and as a mark of great love. Some Jews insisted that Jewish slaves should never be required to wash the feet of others. This job should be reserved for Gentile slaves. In other words, only slaves of what was perceived as an inferior race, or for women and children and students. In one well-known story, when Rabbi Ishmael returned home from synagogue one day and his mother wished to wash his feet, he refused on the grounds that the task was too demeaning. She took the matter to the rabbinic court on the ground that she viewed the task, in his case, as an honor. The reluctance of Jesus' disciples to volunteer for such a task is, to say the least, culturally understandable. Their shock at his volunteering is not merely the result of being shamefaced, it is their response to finding their sense of the fitness of things shattered. But here Jesus removes normal roles. His act of humility is as unnecessary as it is stunning, and is simultaneously a display of his love. Jesus takes off his outer cloak. He wraps a towel around his waist. That left him wearing the clothes of a common slave, dress that was looked down upon by both Jews and Gentiles. See, love always requires sacrifice. If it doesn't cost you something, you're not loving. You may have a really, really, really strong like, but until it costs you something, it's not really love. As the Second World War began to wind down in January 1945, U.S. Army Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds and 1,200 American soldiers had been captured by the Germans during the Battle of the Bulge. They were being held captive in a German Stalag 9A prisoner of war camp. And while there, the Nazi commandant had them all stand to attention, all 1,200 of them, and demanded that all Jewish American prisoners step forward so that they could be separated from the rest. At this point, American military personnel in Europe knew what that meant. The Nazis' intention was to kill the Jewish soldiers. Master Sergeant Edmonds, who was a Christian, was the senior non-commissioned officer at the prisoner of war camp. And so he looked at the German commandant and he replied simply with these words, "We are all Jews here." The German officer knew full well that all 1,200 U.S. soldiers were not Jewish, and so he demanded in a rage that the Jewish soldiers step forward. They, of course, deferred to their commanding officer, and Edwards again simply said, "We are all Jews here." The German officer put a pistol to Edmonds' head and threatened to kill him on the spot, but Edmonds stood firm. He reminded the German officer that the war would very soon be over, and that under the Geneva Convention, prisoners only needed to give name, rank, and serial number. He reminded him that shooting him would be a war crime for which he would be prosecuted, and that he could either shoot all 1,200 of them, which would be a war crime that would certainly get him hanged, or he could shoot none of them. The Nazi commander backed down, and Edmonds' courageous act saved the lives of his Jewish soldiers. But it was risky. Edmonds could not have known that he wouldn't die. He didn't know that they wouldn't all be executed. What he did know was that love required sacrifice. If it costs you nothing, it's not love. And Edmonds was willing to sacrifice his own life for the sake of his soldiers. And he learned that as a follower of Christ from Jesus, who did that for us. See, Jesus is here sacrificing his dignity. He's sacrificing his comfort. He's sacrificing his honor. Love always has a price. It costs you something, and that's a price that Jesus was willing to pay. You know, many years ago, Dave Simmons took his daughter Helen, who at the time was 8 years old, and his son Brandon, who was 5, to a mall to do a little shopping. And he writes, as we drove up, we spotted a Peterbilt 18-wheeler packed with a big sign on it that said, or parked with a big sign on it that said, "Petting Zoo." The kids jumped up in a rush and asked, Daddy, can we go? Please, can we go? They go inside, and sure enough, there's a petting zoo right in the center of the mall. And he says, yes, and he gives them both a quarter before walking into Sears. They bolted away. He says, I felt free to take my time looking for a scroll saw. A petting zoo consists of a portable fence erected in the mall with about 6 inches of sawdust and 100 little furry baby animals of all kinds. Kids pay their money and they stay inside the enclosure enraptured with squirmy little critters while their moms and dads go shopping. This was a while back. Who's going to leave their 5-year-old? Says a few minutes later, he was at Sears and he turned around. I saw Helen walking along behind me. I was shocked to see that she preferred the hardware department of Sears over the petting zoo. Recognizing my error, I bent and I asked her what was wrong. And she looked up at me with those giant, limpid brown eyes and said, well, Daddy, it costs 50 cents. So I gave Brandon my quarter. Then she said the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. She repeated our family motto at the time. The family motto was love in action. She had given Brandon her quarter, and no one loves cuddly, furry creatures more than Helen. He asked, what do you think I did? Well, not what you might think. As soon as I finished my errands, I took Helen to the petting zoo area, and we stood outside by the fence and watched Brandon go crazy petting and feeding the animals. Helen stood with her hands and chin resting on the fence and just watched. I had 50 cents burning a hole in my pocket, but I never offered it to Helen, and she never asked for it, because she knew the whole family motto. It was not love is action. It's love is sacrificial action. Love always pays a price. Love always costs something. Love is expensive. When you love, the benefits accrue to another person's account. Love is for you, not for me. Love gives, it doesn't grab. Helen gave her quarter to Brandon, and she wanted to follow through with her lesson. She knew she had to taste the sacrifice, because love is sacrificial action, and he was teaching his daughter to love. Love can sometimes get messy. Feet can get messy. These feet had not been to a nail salon. They weren't nicely pedicured. They had not had their calluses removed. They had not been treated for toenail fungus if they had toenail fungus. They had walked in streets where camels and horses trod, and camels and horses do not wear diapers when they walk down the street, and there were not street cleaners. These feet may have had bleeding ulcers or been smeared with excrement. They may have been caked in mud or infested with fungus. Love can get dirty. Jesus got dirty. Love can sometimes get incredibly messy. Another account I have is from the 1970s in East Africa. It was a decade of dictatorship and war in Uganda, with the armies of surrounding nations finally bringing an end to the ruthless dictatorship of Idi Amin, a brutal tyrant who had looted his nation of its wealth and left public services and infrastructure in a state of complete collapse. As a group of Western missionaries gathered to pray about how they could best serve the kingdom in this poor district of Kampala, what came to mind was the one obvious thing that no one wanted to mention. Kampala's garbage services had collapsed months earlier. Trucks had been stripped for their parts, and so the poor in the neighborhood had been piling up their trash for many months. Rancid garbage with rotting food and human waste had piled up into a festering mountain of garbage and waste in the middle of the neighborhood, and the missionaries happened to have pickup trucks. So they grabbed massive boxes of garbage bags. They put their gloves on, and they began climbing the mountain of garbage. They began at the very top, filling each bag by hand, retching at the inhumane smells, knowing that they risked disease, worried about sharp objects or needles or broken glass, but they set to work with determination, and the residents of the neighborhood were in shock. People would go door to door and draw people's attention to the spectacle. They'd point at the garbage mountain and yell, "Mazungu, Mazungu, Mazungu," which means white man, white man, white man. They could not believe that white people from a wealthy country would travel to post-colonial Uganda, to the poorest neighborhood in town, and take upon themselves such a humiliating job as carting out by hand trash and human waste. Soon, Christians from the neighborhood, seeing the missionaries' love for them, began to join in the task, and soon the whole neighborhood had joined in. And as soon as one truck returned from the landfill, another would take off. And after much hard work, the neighborhood was finally clean. Parents could again let their children play without fear. The air began to clear, all because some followers of Jesus were willing to get dirty just like he did, just as he was willing to wrap his hands around filthy, fetid, disgusting feet. They were willing to go and do likewise. Jesus shows us that love is doing what's best for other people, but that it has to cost something, and it can be very messy. So how can you give that kind of love? How is it possible? It's possible, friends, because there is one who gave that kind of love for you. See, only loved people can really love. Jesus is stressing here how immense his love is, and he's loving them to the very end. 1 John 4, John writes, "We love because he first loved us." Jesus in John 15 says, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you." In Ephesians 5, St. Paul says, "Walk in love as Christ loved and gave himself up for us." It's a natural response to being loved that we are then able in return to love. I've got a photo here, actually. You've probably seen this before. That's my little boy's socks when he was a kitten. He's my closest companion. And when I first got him, of course, I had another cat, Leela, who was a year and a half older. And Leela was of the opinion that this was a one-cat apartment and that the usurper should not be permitted and should be returned or killed or something. And so I put Socks in the dining room for the first week. And the dining room had folding doors with a little gap underneath so they could pat each other and whatnot and get used to each other's smells. And it was really for Leela's sake, because Socks, it was so sad. I'd go in there and he'd just be so needy and lonely in this dining room all by himself. But after a week, I decided it was time. I let him out, and that first night, he got up in bed and got under the sheets. And I noticed he started licking me as I was falling asleep. And you should understand, I'm allergic to cats. I have a Claritin for breakfast every day and an Allegra for dinner. And even then I keep Benadryl cream at close hand. But as I fell asleep, I realized he was licking me. And I just thought, this is so cute. We'll do this once. By the time I woke up, my chest looked like hamburger. It was so swollen and inflamed and cracked and bleeding. It was a disaster. So I decided that was never, ever going to happen again, and it didn't. But this little guy who was going to be put to death got grabbed by a rescue group, and I adopted him. He was the runt of his litter. He was the one in the cage that was all by himself while all the others snuggled together. After a week alone, he finally got to be included in the bedroom, and he was so thankful. It was his natural instinct to try to clean me as a thank you. That's a natural response to love. To being loved is that we respond with love. Friends, if your love cup is full and overflowing, you are going to have plenty of love to give to other people, including people who absolutely do not deserve it, just like we did not deserve it when Jesus loved us. However, if you find yourself critical or unforgiving or bitter, it is because your love cup is empty. And you need to go back to Jesus and let him fill your cup up with love so that you will have more overflowing. In fact, the best thing you can do is try your hardest to love other people, fail miserably at it, then take that to Jesus, let him wash you and forgive you, and let his love and delight in you wash over you again, filling back up your love cup so that you can overflow again to other people. You got to be loved first. Then you'll be able to love others. See, love me doesn't produce love. I've challenged those of you who are husbands to try this with your wives before. You need to try explaining to your wife the obligation that she took to love you, reminding her of the vows that she made on your wedding day, and reminding her of her duty and obligation to love you. Better yet, order her to love you, and then come and let me know how that's going after a couple weeks. Because there is nothing that will harden a heart faster. The wall goes up, it gets cold as ice, than being commanded to love someone, especially by that person. Because love me doesn't elicit love. I love you elicits love. If you go to your spouse and you just love them, giving them what they need, which may not be what they want, but what they need, serving them, loving them, it's very different from possessing them. Sometimes we get that, we use love to mean something emotional, like, oh, I really feel like I need to have you in my life. That's not love, that's feelings. Love is action. Love is putting them first. You love them, you serve them, you care for them, you protect them. You figure out what their dreams and aspirations are and figure out how you can sacrifice to help them reach that. And they will love you in return, Lord willing. They will love you in return, because love me doesn't elicit love. I love you, acted out in practice, brings about love within us. And this love of Jesus makes us clean. That was the symbolism of the foot washing. Unless I wash you, Jesus says, you can have no part in me. Jesus came to wash us and make us clean. His washing of their feet at the Last Supper on the eve of his crucifixion shows us the reason Christ had to die, because we were dirty before a holy and righteous God. We had no chance of standing before him in eternity. Our sin was a burden that was going to crush us forever and drive us out from his presence. And then Jesus said, let me take that off your shoulders. And he lifted it off your shoulders, put it on his, went to the cross, and experienced the wrath of God for your sake and my sake, carrying our burden because he loved you. And it cost him something. And that's how he makes us clean. Because we had failed to love God. We had failed to love our neighbor. But Jesus was willing to carry that for us, so that we don't have to carry it anymore. And they're therefore clean. You've been washed. You carry your sin no more. And you're loved so that you can then love others. This was costly. What did Jesus sacrifice to love you? Carson writes, the way Jesus displays his unflagging love for his own is in the cross immediately ahead, and in the act of self-abasing love, the foot washing that anticipates the cross. For greater love has no one than this, Christ says, that he lay down his life for his friends. Realize that Jesus washed the feet, at this point even of Judas, who was still in the room and had already decided to betray Jesus, and Christ knew that. It attests so strongly to the character of Jesus. He can know you all the way down and still love you and still want to be in relationship with you, even when you end up choosing to reject his love, because his self-sacrificial love meant way more than dying. It meant absorbing the judgment of God for humanity's sin and letting him be cut off from the Father instead of me and instead of you. There is no double jeopardy in the kingdom of God. If Christ has paid down your debt, it is paid down forever. He has drunk the cup of God's wrath and drunk it all the way down to the dregs, because the Father loved you and sent him to do that, and there is not a drop of judgment left in that cup. Christ has left it completely empty, so that you will only be blessed if you believe in Jesus. Remember one 3-year-old boy, this was probably around 1999, he looked up and he said, Jesus took my spanking for me. It wasn't a perfect analogy, but you don't really lecture a 3-year-old when they start getting the gospel. Only it was way more than a spanking. It was the ultimate time out from the love of the Father, time out from that union and love that he had had with the Father and the Spirit from all eternity, the greatest rupture in the history of the cosmos. He purchased the price of our freedom to redeem us, so that we as slaves could go free. It was Jesus who went up into that bell tower and wrapped himself around the clangor and allowed that to crush him and destroy him completely. It was Jesus who went up to you with your twisted face and twisted his mouth and face in order to be able to approach you in love. It was Jesus who gave up the quarter so that you could go to the petting zoo. Only the petting zoo is heaven itself. It was Jesus who climbed up the mountain of our garbage to clean up our mess for us because he loved us. It was Jesus who was willing to say to the Nazi commandant, we are all Jews here, only Jesus gave up his own life for us. That's what Jesus did for you. That's the cross. That is love. And he wouldn't have it any other way. You're never going to be able to drum up love for people around you simply through self-will and determination. You're going to fail, and then you're going to take that to Jesus and get forgiven of it and feel his love again, and then you're going to wash, rinse, and repeat every day until you die if you follow Christ in this call to love. Jesus says, I want you to love them the way I loved you. I want you to put them first, to sacrifice for them. It has to cost you something. If it isn't costly, it's not love. And the only way you can give that kind of self-sacrificial love is if you let me love you that way and experience my love and delight over you. I see your sin, but I love you. I'm committed to you. I've already borne that for you. You will never bear it again. Even if I have to go to hell for you, Jesus says, I'm willing to do that. And in fact, that's exactly what he did on the cross. I have another slide here. This is Dennis Weichel. After, we hear so many stories involving atrocities at war, but Specialist Dennis Weichel of the Rhode Island National Guard really stands out. It was 2012 when, according to the official Pentagon news release, he died from injuries suffered in a non-combat related incident. That doesn't sound very impressive. But let me tell you what really happened. He was stationed with the U.S. Army in Laghman province in Afghanistan, and there were some children in the road in front of his convoy, and Weichel and other troops got out to move the kids out of the way, but of the children that were moved, one little girl went back to pick up some brass shell casings that were shiny and in the middle of the road. But a mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle, or MRAP, was moving toward her rapidly, according to eyewitnesses. MRAPs, as they are known, usually weigh more than 16 tons, and even if they spot someone in front, they're too heavy, too great a mass to be able to stop very quickly. Weichel saw a massive truck bearing down on this little girl, and he grabbed her out of the way, but in the process, the armored truck ran him over, and he died at the scene. The little girl is fine. Weichel died of his injuries. That's what love looks like. Only imagine that wasn't an innocent little girl looking at something shiny in the middle of the street. Imagine that was a Taliban extremist who was trying to kill you. To jump in and rescue his life and to die in the process. That is what Christ did for you, because the Bible says it was when we were his enemies that Christ died for us. That's love. It's an eternal love that planned all of this out before creation, that created the world and brought about human history so that at its climax we might see the love of God manifest with his justice and compassion and mercy and grace, all in the cross of Christ, who is coming again at the end of history to make everything right. Friends, on the night in which he was betrayed, Jesus said, "This is the most important thing. I want you to love each other the way I have loved."